What we're being called to in Christian marriage is not humanly possible, but for the grace of God, right?
Yeah, marriage is no joke.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's right.
marriage is difficult, folks. We know this. Marriage is no joke.
Welcome to the podcast where you're in for a treat today, and we're glad you joined us.
Yeah. We have people actually who contact us all the time about marriage issues. Sorry to interrupt you. We have people
You
who
do that all the time. Don't apologize.
People who contact us with pretty serious marriage issues sometimes. And one thing that I wonder is about those marriages that do survive, like how do they do it?
Yeah.
How do they get through that? But sometimes it's like so painful. Like I can't ask those people. You know what I mean? I can't go up and ask them because maybe they're in it or they're trying to figure it out
And
or
they
whatever.
want to leave that in their rearview mirror or who knows, right?
Exactly. But Kevin, we're going to be sharing with you an interview with Kevin Wells on his book, The Hermit. He is so vulnerable in this book and in this interview. It is like, I feel like we get this like inside track to the wounds of his heart. It's a deep sense
of vulnerability on his part and for his wife.
Yeah.
But you know, for all of us who probably know people or have ourselves been struggling in our marriage, struggling in a very serious way. And this is a story of how one couple that made it through. It wasn't easy.
Yeah.
But how they got to the other side. And I think we need to tell more of those stories because there are a lot of people who have suffered through these things, and we just need we need those encouragements. But before we get into that topic, and really a great conversation, you're going to love it. This June 1st, so depending on when you're listening to this, June 1st is the week before Pentecost.
Yes.
And we would love for you to join us for this exciting webinar. We're going to be doing a date night, partnered up with Encounter Ministries.
Look them up if you don't know who they are.
Dr. Tobin and his wife, Nicole, we're going to be talking about how to unleash the Holy Spirit in your family as parents in your home. This is one of our jobs. We talk about this in general terms, but what does that look like?
Right.
You're going to get some great inspiration and a great ways to make it very practical and alive in your family.
We're very excited about this webinar.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
And if you're on our newsletter list, you know we are ending our May appeal. We're in the middle of our May appeal, actually. Right. And we are going to be calling it the May appeal because we're going to be doing it until the end of May. And we are trying to raise money to continue to develop our courses and get them out and market them, and which is our big way of serving families. So give now if you can, and win cool prizes, get some access to
win prizes.
That's right.
No, there's some really great stuff that you can get.
Yes.
When we like to give, when we get some donations, right?
Right. So we have a great course that we did on virtues and vices. We're offering that with almost any donation. You can go to the website and check that out, as well as our Yetis and pullovers. But anyway, we're really excited about what we are doing and our mission for families, and we just invite you to be a part of it. Help us out. We
need your help to equip parents and reach parents with what we believe is going to be powerful tools, powerful resources, and encouragement that they need and support to fulfill our sacred vocation as moms and dads. Yeah. All right, so let's jump into the conversation. Yeah. Kevin Wells, author, speaker, evangelist, and he has written a number of books. The Priest We Need to Save the Church, but the book we're going to be talking about is The Hermit. Right. And he is an active evangelist, and he started out as a sports writer, which I find really interesting, but then moved over to church writing, and he lives in Maryland with his kids. And we're going to just jump into his interview, and I guarantee you're going to love it. So stay tuned for our key points that we're going to pull out of this interview, because he gives us a lot of great lessons. Stay tuned for those at the end. Well, Kevin Wells, thank you for joining us today. We're so happy to have you on the program to talk about really a pretty powerful book and story. Yeah. And we're so glad you could be with us.
It's wonderful to be with you, Mike and Alicia.
Thanks. Just real quick, how long have you been married? Kids, where are you from? Just so people can just kind of know who you are.
Yeah, married to Krista for 26 years, 3 children.
All right.
and I live outside of Annapolis, Maryland.
Awesome. Yeah,
Okay.
beautiful place down there. And really, you have written a number of books, but today
Yeah.
we want to talk about The Hermit, the priest who saved a soul, a marriage, and a family. And this is obviously a very personal story for you. And
Yeah, I mean, I read it yesterday, to be honest with you. I laid down and I just like, whoop, and it's definitely a page turner for sure. And I see some great people that we know who have endorsed the book itself. But it's really, I mean, it's very clear, first of all, that you definitely have a heart for priests, that you love the priesthood. And I know you had an uncle who was a priest who was killed. I mean, that in itself is just a compelling story. But I was just like, wow, this man has been through, you've been through so much. And I'm sure the Lord has taught you so much through everything he's allowed you to experience, right?
Well, yeah, it's if we're not going to learn when God pounds us to the ground or allows us to be pounded to the ground, if we don't come up changed, then we don't get it. We don't get the plot of what God's trying to do. We know this from Scripture, from Paul, Saul becoming Paul. There's got to be transformation or conversion or it doesn't have to be like full blast, but day by day by day, God's calling us more deeply to him. And oftentimes I think God can really love us with boxing gloves. I really do. You never really said, but God so violently loves us and wants us to live within his will that sometimes I think he'll allow us to be flattened.
And I think that's definitely clear. Like and we're going to have you share a little bit about your story here, but I think that perspective will help people hear what you have to say. Because some people could hear what you have to say and be like, how could he go through this? How could, he still believe in God? And it's just, it has to be an overwhelming confidence that you have a heavenly Father who loves you, who allows everything
for your good,
for our good. I mean, it
in the
really
end, but not necessarily in that moment, doesn't always feel that way. Yeah. So Kevin, for those who haven't read the book, maybe you could just give us a little bit of the story, what you share, because there's a lot there that you brought out in the book.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. So I'll just kind of start with the preamble because there is sort of a preamble, but so I married my wife, Krista, and we really wanted to have a large family. I'm from a large family. There's 10 of us, and we found out shortly after marriage that we couldn't have kids. God didn't bless us that way, and pretty quickly, almost like right away, we became Hatfield and McCoy. So why? Because Krista wanted to do in vitro fertilization, and I wanted to adopt. I mean, I had grown up in a family of priests, and I knew that the church was against it, and it was really bad. Finally, my uncle Monsignor Thomas Wells on June 6th, 2000, I had sort of held my wife back from seeing him because I knew it was going to be 2 against 1, and my poor wounded wife was suffering enough, but she agreed to meet with him, and on this day he broke open an omnibus on redemptive suffering and carrying the cross, and that actually this infertility could be seen as a gift from God because it would enable us to understand what it's like to climb Golgotha, to carry Simon's cross.
Wow.
To really to have this intimate friendship with Christ in a way that we were experiencing paralyzing pain, but you know what?
Right.
Because God wanted us to become more to Him in a certain way. So anyway, 2 days later in that rectory, when our lives were changed, he was murdered in his rectory, Alicia, as you mentioned, and without going too far afield about the devastation of what that did to really the Mid-Atlantic seaboard, it was devastating news. As Krista and I finally got past it and began to adopt children, about 9 years later, I had a brain aneurysm. I had what's called an arteriovenous malformation. I had just turned 40 years old, and I was this close to dying. And sort of moving the story along, I had failed invasive brain surgery. They couldn't sort of stop the blood that was drowning my brain from this tangle of blood vessels that were sort of renegade blood vessels. So a healing priest came into my neuro ICU room. I was incapacitated after the surgery, and he came in with his assistant, and he said, "Hey, Kevin, I was out of it, but he said, Kevin, we've been calling on the saints on our drive up to the hospital, and we know that saints can intercede now and help us, and you need help. And is there a saint that we can call on for you now?" And if he was on this podcast right now and he was looking into the camera, he would say that what I said was, without opening my eyes, without turning my head, I said, "Bring my uncle down, Monsignor Thomas Wells, the murdered priest." And
Wow.
This particular priest was one of my uncle's best friends. Actually, he was my uncle's best friend. His name was Father Jim Stack. And Father Stack, my uncle called him Stack Man, went to the foot of my bed and started to call my uncle and say, hey, Tommy, man, you don't save Kevin's life. He's dead. Like, you got to save him now. And then the entire room took on well, I'll leave it up to your viewers if they want to read what happened in that room, but it was of the supernatural. And Father Stack said, I knew I was standing in the midst of a miracle because of what was happening. And 2 days later, it all disappeared. Or no, actually the next day when they put me in one of those CT scans, the blood, the fluids, the malformation up here, it all. So anyway, I got home. I survived, right? I shouldn't have. So jackpot.
Should be the happy ending, right? That should be it. Go off in the sunset.
You would think so. So what happened, and I'll kind of shut it down and turn it over to you from here. But what happened was when I finally got home 3 weeks later, and when you have brain surgery, you're messed up. I mean, it's a mess. I had to relearn how to walk, talk, all that kind. So, but what happened was, I really did begin to go to God more intensely because I knew I was this close, and a certain part of me was like I wasn't ready. Mm-hmm. I wasn't ready for judgment. So I began to attend more weekday masses, daily rosaries, prison ministry, more measures of love for my wife and kids, just wanting to really live within God's will. So what happened was, without me knowing and without Krista knowing, as I started going a different direction, like let's say a direction towards God, it scared my wife, and it opened up what she would tell you was a mother wound of shame. It really wasn't loved maybe the way a young 7-8-year-old daughter should be loved, and
see, that's so interesting. Can I just say that's so interesting that it was when you started coming closer to God, that was the catalyst for her struggle. And doesn't that it somehow seems unfair? We think, oh, we're going to go to God and everything's going to be better.
So Satan has an endless cabinet filled with trickery, wiles, and lies. And I've learned that when a little girl who's 7 or 8 years old, all she really wants at that stage is for her mom and dad to love them, because that's what a child wants. Yeah. And when that 7-year-old girl is told, why can't you be more like your sister? Or why can't you lose a couple pounds? Or why do you need to ride horses instead of being a cheerleader? Well, that poor little girl all of a sudden realizes, I'm not loved. The one person who should love me, I'm not loved. So what happens, of course, in the supernatural realm, Satan sticks the talons in this poor girl's head and says, I will take her to hell. It might take 40 years, 50 years, but I own her now because she does not know love, and she'll never know the Father's love. She feels shame. Yeah. So what happened was, when Krista saw me growing, she said, oh, Kevin's shaming me. In this ways that we can't understand, because he's growing, and in a certain way he's mocking me, or but really it's like I can't go where Kevin's going, and the devil will say, hey Krista, guess what?
Yes.
Kevin says you don't stand up, you don't measure up, and all of a sudden in a way I become like the mom from 40 years ago. Yeah. So what do you do when that happens? You begin to hide the shame, in Krista's case, with red wine. For the first time in her life, she said, I've got to kill the shame. Satan says, oh yeah, no one gets you. Kevin doesn't get you. God doesn't like, you're a clown show. So you got to do something. So she chose red wine to kill the shame. And that's where the lovely story of the hermit began.
Wow.
So did she ever really drink to excess before that time?
No.
Okay. So that was one of my questions as I was reading the book. That's so interesting.
And it makes, in a way, it makes a lot of sense that she's seeking an escape. She's seeking to medicate all the shame that she's feeling. I mean, life only makes sense in retrospect. Looking back on it now, that must have been horrific for both of you to go through. Very different stories at that time, but you watching this unfold. Did it become clear to you right away, or was that something that kind of evolved as her story came to be?
It took a couple years to understand the magnitude of shame. So I don't know if your viewers have really thought much about shame, because I never did. But what I found out about shame is this: it's the worst one, because nobody can live with shame. Like, you can live with doing something wrong, you failed a test, but when you have shame, you simply can't exist with something that makes you sick of yourself. So what do? You gotta first you medicate it with drugs, wine, pornography. But here's the problem about shame that most people don't talk about or realize. Shame needs to be vomited up. So you need to find a release, and you need to pinpoint somebody.
Yes, right.
I'm the one, because why? Right. Because I am her mom.
Yeah.
I'm the one who says, hey, Krista, maybe the drinking's not the right thing. Or, hey, Krista, the kids, they don't need to see a hidden bottle of red wine. Well, all of a sudden, I'm the mom from 40 years ago who shamed her.
Yeah.
So shame is an awful. Satan loves shame. Matter of fact, I'll say, I don't know about like pornography and drugs and all the other, but alcohol, Satan is directly involved with, and he uses shame with it. So yeah, shame's a tough one. But when I finally understood what Krista was going through, I began to realize one thing: if somehow or another I can sort of take this spiral staircase down into this defect or this thing that happened, this shame, and begin to sort of work at scalpeling out, then the lie goes. Then the Satan's talons go, and then the graces can come in to heal that broken part. So that's what took a while.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
When you say a while, like how many? What are you talking about?
7 years.
7 years.
7 years from the time she started drinking to when she was really free into. Because I read that she actually wound up going into a rehab center, but even it really seemed like it was like a roller coaster. Which I think is probably the story of a lot of addicts, where they're trying to get out and then falling back. And, it seemed like there's a lot of back and forth, right? I mean, that seems really hard.
So what happens, I imagine, I don't really speak to a lot of, alcoholics or what other couples go to, but what I've sort of realized is the way it works is this. And I know viewers right now that are watching this who have a spouse who's suffering from, let's say, alcoholism. Yeah. This is what happens. So in piecemeal fashion, the hurt spouse, the spouse who's been drinking, they'll begin to have a realization, or the conscience will say, you know what, I've got to stop this. I'm hurting my kids, or I'm sick of myself. I'm sick of waking up with whatever. So they'll have moments of clarity, and they'll be like good 1 week, 2 week, or even month-long stretches. Mm-hmm. But until the wound is removed, like in this case, shame, what happens is the spouse who's trying to get better, the addicted spouse who's trying to get better, Satan will look for something to snap them back into the tomb of their unworthiness, their shame. So the first thing that comes along that will like sort of trigger, oh, I'm unworthy, or I'm being made fun of, or this person's overlooking me. Well, Satan's like, see, you can't live in this world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't stand up. So they're sucked back with that chain into the tomb, and they start drinking again. This is the yin and yang, the roller coaster of alcoholism. So until the thing is plucked out and removed, Christ can't Christ can stick his finger into anything, but you got to get rid of that wound.
Yes. And what I've always seen with, and you identified it and kind of described it so accurately from those that we've talked to, right? It's like, it's one thing to say that I made a mistake or even something happened to me. And it's another thing to say, I am the mistake. You know, I am a failure. I am unworthy. Because once you say you're unworthy, then that means that, because I had a husband one time just asked me, why does every time I compliment my wife, she just brushes it off. She dismisses it. It's like water off a duck's back. It's because she didn't believe she was worthy. And at the core of that, there was some wound that led her to change her own identity, that she didn't understand who she was. Right? Is that what you're saying? That until your wife could have that wound addressed, until that lie of the shame of who she wasn't ripped out? Is that what happened?
That's exactly it. Obviously, there's a gradation or a magnitude in how bad the wound was from early on. So, like, for instance, I think probably the mass of humanity walks around with a wound. Right. Like, in a certain sense, we're all wounded. So, but some of us can say, well, you know, intellectually, we can say, well, this is stunting my growth, or it's hurting my spouse, or it's my employment. So if we're Catholic, for instance, we know the medicine is in the daily mass, or the medicine is in monthly confession, or I need to spend more time in front of the monstrance. So that wound is diminished and it can disappear. But if you're terribly wounded and you say, well, I'm unworthy, then we have free will. And the one thing that God gave us that I scratched my head, like, God, why do you have to give us this free will? Because we can just keep going back to the wound, to the I don't know, the elixir of wine to kill our unworthiness, because we have free will. But so that's why the wound has got to be removed.
Right.
So what would
I just wanted to ask a question about like your wife's and the role of a spouse, right? And so I was just thinking about this, is that in reading your story and just like kind of like knowing a little bit about addiction, that, you know, everybody says, and I know that this is true, that at the end of the day, the addict has to make that decision for themselves, right? They have to, because nobody can do it for them, right? It's as an act really of the will. But at the same time, I shouldn't say but, I say and, and at the same time, marriage is a healing sacrament. And you, as an intercessor, as someone who was covenanted to her, you also have a role, though. Can you just like explain your experience of that a little bit? Do you know what I'm saying?
I know precisely what you're saying. I think it's the most important question. So what does the spouse do when he or she finally realizes that the month-longs of cold showers, or the intensified fasting, or the daily rosaries, or the double rosaries, or the greater measures of love, or all of that not only doesn't work, but it's getting worse. So what does the spouse do then?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what I finally ended up learning is, you in my own case, this is what happened with me, is I began to understand I needed to pray like a little boy, like a 6-year-old boy lost in Grand Central Station without a token. He's lost his parents. And I began to sort of enter into contemplative prayer or mystical prayer, where every morning I would get up at 5, light a candle, and I would, I had to go to God, like I had to go to my inner cell, or in my case, I had built like this cottage in my soul where I would always like walk down into this place in my soul. It was always like a little thatched cottage with a little fireplace, and the image of the sacred heart was above the fireplace. I always had 2 cups of tea, and I would just sit there, and there was 2 benches, and I'd sit there on the one bench, and I would wait for Christ to come in the door, and sometimes he didn't come in, but I would just say, Christ, you're all I have. And you know, I'm like a little lost boy right now, and I have no answers, but you're my Father, and you can tend to me. And in many of those days, he wouldn't come through the door, but some days he would. And when he would come in, he'd sit on the bench across from me, and I'd hand him his tea, and we would talk and talk and talk, but he never opened his mouth, because all I was doing was I was laying my head against his heart and saying, I'm broken. And Krista's broken. And I got nothing. And you know it all anyway. So I'm just going to rest with you. I'm going to abide in you. And I'm going to surrender to you because I can't do anything, but you can. So I meditative prayer, contemplative prayer, mystical prayer, I'll say, that's what enabled me in the dark night of the soul. And I was in the dark night of the soul. This was the dark night.
Yeah. Wow.
I was in a desert. So, one thing I want to say is this to your spouses right now, to your viewers right now who are suffering the way I suffered. I want to encourage you this. So you're in a metaphorical desert. Like, you're not in a real desert. Because you can eat dinner tonight. You got a warm blanket tonight when you go to bed. But you're in a real desert. But when God called Ezekiel, Abraham, Moses, all the desert prophets, desert monks, deeper into the desert, it wasn't because he wanted Moses and Abraham to get sand whipped and have lonely nights and suffer and not be able to eat. No, God said, trust me and come further into the desert. Like, I want you to encounter what true surrender looks like. Come to me in this darkness, and I will provide. So the desert for me during that time, it did become like a palace, because I knew the further I went into this dark place, this hurtful place, the more I would encounter Jesus Christ spread out on the cross, who had no consolations. Yeah. He loved by pouring himself out in violence. And that's how I had to love Krista. My love needed to be intensified. The less she loved me, the more I had to love her. And how did I do it? With no consolations, no good stretches, no good days, no like happy moments. Right. I needed to love her on the sidelines of her soul, on the other side of the ocean, when she was speaking a different language. That was the greatest form of love that I could give her.
Wow. Yeah. Ultimately, you're not just abandoning yourself to the will of God, you're actually just receiving.
That's it.
And because one of my favorite scripture passages is, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And you just, because I was waiting for you, I was going to start taking a list here. Okay, this is what a spouse does when their spouse is an addict or is struggling with this. You just said, go to Jesus. Go to Jesus and rest in his sacred heart and let him be with you in your brokenness, in your weakness, and in your powerlessness. I mean, for a man, that's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
No, well, I don't know if it is or not. But I do. I do think, Mike, that sometimes we forget like those bracelets were great. They came out in the 1990s that said WWJD. They were great. Okay. But they didn't get it done, because you could sort of conform WWJD to whatever you want. Oh, well, Jesus would approve of this form of sin because Jesus loved. So they kind of got it. But I always kind of think like, what about if I actually try to resemble what Jesus did? Like, what about if I get into Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? So the point I'm making is this. When Jesus knew he was about to finally begin his public ministry, what did he do? He went away for 40 days and he didn't eat to encounter his Father. So in my way, I was in a desert, and all I could do was go to God in that desert. Right. And what happened? Jesus was emboldened and strengthened, obviously, to confront the devil when the devil came in the desert, but then to begin the ministry. Like, he was explosive out of the desert. So that's where I needed to go. I needed to go to the desert, again, not to get sand whipped, not to be lonely, but to encounter God.
Well, it makes me think of something we just were talking about on a video that we were doing, is that, and this sounds it's very a countercultural view of love, but that you can't really love someone unless you can say to them, I don't need you. In other words, I don't need you to love me for me to love you. That's real. That's the essence of unconditional love. And I think about kind of what you went through is kind of like elderly people at the end of their lives. You have a spouse who maybe doesn't remember you, or who is very, very ill. And those, like my great-grandparents, like my great-grandfather took care of my great-grandmother. She had 10 years dementia, didn't know who he was. And you know what? When she died, He died like 3 weeks later. You know, that's that unconditional love.
Yeah,
I'm
gift
not
of
loving
self.
you because of what I'm getting. I'm loving you because this is my path to heaven, right?
That is not
This
humanly
you know,
possible, though. Let's
it's
be
without
honest.
grace.
That
Yeah.
is what we're being called to in Christian marriage is not humanly possible, but for the grace of God, right?
Yeah, marriage is no joke.
Yeah.
I mean, marriage,
That's right.
marriage is difficult, folks. We know this. Marriage is no joke. But so Alicia, you made a great analogy with the elderly folks. But in another way, you look at it like it demands unparalleled faith. So Monica understood that Augustine was sleeping around, that had fathered a child out of wedlock, that was so far away from the church. But Monica begged and pled with God, would you take Augustine and bring him to the church? 20 years go by. Would you bring him somebody? And all of a sudden, St. Anselm shows up. No, St. Ambrose. The only guy smarter in Rome, in Africa than Augustine was Ambrose. So she loved him unconditionally. She knew that he was a train wreck, but she never gave up on God, and God provided. That's kind of the way it is. Because like you said, Mike, I can't do it, but God can. God can do it.
Amen.
Right.
Amen.
You know, and that's actually, I think, a great way to go into talking about the priesthood and the roles of the priests in your life. Because I was just thinking about how many, I mean, there's in the book, one of the things I love about the story is that it really highlights the beautiful ministry of many just regular parish priests who just love people, right? And I really appreciate that, because I feel like there's so many priests today who are counseling people in your situation who would say, you know what, it really would be okay if you left. You didn't sign up for this. You could probably get an annulment, like you can walk away. If you had, like hypothetically, if we had those priests here, or if they were to hear your story, if you were talking to a room of them, who would counsel people to be like, hey, you don't have to stay. This is too difficult. What would you say to them?
Well, the priest that would say it's okay to get an annulment and leave, I would say, shame on you. Shame on you. And Mike, you said something a minute ago, you really quickly, but I want to throw it out there. You said, this is how like we earn salvation, or this is the purgative way. So the priest that would say, yeah, you know what? Yeah, she's drank for too many years. She doesn't listen. And she just, shame on you, Father. Don't you understand how Jesus Christ loved? He loved in pure sacrifice. He loved in violence. He loved when his apostles never understood him. He had nowhere to lay his head at night. He was mocked by the temple leaders, the rabbis, Pharisees. He didn't care. He just plowed forward because it was the will of his Father. Well, you know what, Father? The will of me and the vows I took were for sickness and health and better for worse. So how dare you tell me to leave my wounded wife, because she needs me to love her now more than she ever has.
Exactly.
Because I'm not. You might give up on her, but I'm not. So I would say shame on you.
Yeah.
And as you saw, Alicia, you saw what these other priests did. They never told me that. They said, hey, Wells, stick your nose into it even further. Go deeper into the trench with her. Why? Because God is sovereign.
Yeah.
We need priests around us, particularly in those dark moments, to counsel us as the spouse and also advocate and help our spouses. What role do you think priests played in helping you and helping your wife? Because you had a number of priests. Some were more effective on the earth, maybe move the needle, if you will, on an earthly side.
Everybody had a different role, it seemed like.
Right, but some of them
that you highlight.
What would you? What are some highlights from that you would look at from the priests that involved?
Well, if I can make a public service announcement for if there's any clergy watching, or if you want to encourage your parish priest about what I'm about to say, I believe it 100%, and I believe it helped to save my wife Krista and pull her out of her addiction. So Father Flume, as Krista was beginning to heal, through daily adoration, through daily mass. I mean, she was doing these things, weekly confessions, intensive spiritual direction. As she was beginning sort of to lift the tomb and come out, she had periodic falls, like she would fall. Right. So during this time when she was having recurring falls still, Father Flume in direction would say things like this, Krista, we've been out this for a while, and I guess I've determined that in a way you love the demon inside you more than anything that I can do for you, and I think we're gonna have to part ways, because I can't do much for you anymore, because you're on a track that's taking you to hell, and wow. I want to help you, but right now your soul looks like it's going to be damned. So wow. So when Krista would hear, and what happened was, in that one particular spiritual direction session, Father Flume didn't blink. Father Flume wasn't emotional. Father Flume spoke very calmly, and Krista got up from the chair with her eyes filled with tears and drove home like her son just got shot in war, knowing that, oh my God, I just lost the only shepherd that is actually healing me. So what am I saying here? Until priests become like it's like a shepherd on an Irish hillside, or a shepherd in a chancery. Until the shepherd says, I will attack the wolf. I will not only protect the flock. If I see a wolf, I will go after the wolf, and I don't care what happens. The wolf's got to go. So oftentimes the wolf is our addictions, whatever it is. We're too prideful, we're vainglorious, whatever it is. We eat too much, we're on pornography. Until the priest goes after the wolf and speaks with candor and firmness, and hopefully he's attentive to what the Holy Spirit has infused in him to say, well, maybe the addicted person's really not going to be helped. Yeah. So false charity, false mercy, we'll give it another shot. That's purposeless. Yeah. It doesn't do anything. So that's the way I feel. Hopefully I answered the question.
No, that's not a genteel answer. That's not a politically correct answer. And I think that takes a lot of courage. And obviously it came from a place of relationship, right? This priest knew her and had been working with her for a little while, right? So, right,
Really quick, Mike. Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have said that. A priest should never dare say something like that unless there's been a 1 year or 2 year relationship. So yeah, I'm sorry.
No. Those who read the book will know that. But for this conversation, but that level of a relationship is there to be able to speak truth. We're not just pastorally or apostolically in relationships with people as for a priest, for out the purpose of bringing them closer to Jesus Christ, without bringing them closer to the fullness that he has for them. And if you get to that point after a year or two and you're seeing that they're still holding on to the old life, the old man, as St. Paul would say, it's not charitable to not point it out. It's actually, there's so much there. It sounds very harsh from our modern ears, but truth is that two-edged sword, and we want to cut people free from a life that's leading them to hell. And too often we don't talk about that reality, right. and we're leaving people to their own devices, because we have met couples who have been, why didn't anyone, about contraception, why didn't anyone tell me? They were kind to me. They assumed I knew things that I didn't know. Right. And it's like, we need to be able to be charitable as well as truth. The church always combines the charity and truth together, because Father Paul Check said this one time, charity without truth is sentimentality, and truth without charity is a club. And he says, but together is what brings life. Yeah. And that's, anyway.
And I think the thing is that Father Flume could see that in her, had enough time to know she's holding on. She's holding on to this sin, and we're giving her the opportunity to choose the Lord, and she's not. I'm curious, just for our listeners, like, because I know that the end of the story. What did, just so they know.
Yeah. What happened after that
What
confrontation?
happened after that?
That almost sounds like a pretty confrontational moment there, right? She went home crying.
And then.
This could be a movie here, Kevin.
I know it may have been a while, but.
Krista was scared to death. And she came to me, and she knew, like, I was frustrated for years. Like, she knew, like, how I felt. I felt like Father Flume, but for many more years. So, but she was agonized because her spiritual father had said something this bold. So I don't know if you recall, Alicia, but what happened was, I remember we actually took out a book. And I'm such a bad person, but the Holy Spirit inspired me. And this book is a beautiful compendium. And the book it's one of those coffee table books, costs $80. It's a beautiful book, but it was a book on the supernatural. It's like on mystics and seers all the way down the millennia in the church. And we looked into, because Krista was just alerted to the flames of hell or purgatory, and we looked into what the mystics actually experienced. Yeah, no, we did.
When experiencing hell.
In hell, like what?
Wow.
Like for instance, and with the Fatima children. So I say, Krista, yeah, we don't want this. You don't want it. I don't want this. So I tell you what. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go with you whenever you're ready back to see Father Flume, and we're gonna basically, you're gonna beg and say, I'm in the game.
Set your will.
Yeah, set my will. Like, maybe that was a rock bottom moment, Father. Maybe that was my bottom. It certainly felt like my bottom. So I am going in further. And this is actually when she really did go further into the trench, and she really did sincerely begin to heal.
Wow.
Would you say that was the turning point for her?
That's amazing.
What 100%. And that's why I answered the way I did.
Okay.
It's because, and I'm just going to say this, like, the burden of the identity of any clergy member, or even me, but we'll just stick with the ministerial clergy, the ministerial priesthood, is one thing. Every single person in front of me sitting on those pews, I'm the custodian of their souls.
Yeah.
They're in my parish. So it doesn't matter. So if you're a connoisseur of personalities, well, then you address each personality as they are and try and steer them to God in heaven. So Father Flume understood Krista very well at this point. And he understood through the Holy Spirit that this is what Krista needed to hear. So he said it. So because he was the shepherd of her soul. And that's what really put Krista on the path.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Wow.
And that's what we need. We need because as a spouse, you're not supposed to do this alone. Really, that's the only thing that I've come to, is that when we've seen couples who are really struggling, they need a community, they need a church, but we need priests who are able to be real shepherds, to be real fathers. Why don't we have priests like that, or where can we go to find priests that have that for? I don't know.
You know what, Mike? I wish we had. You remember Bobby Knight, the Indiana basketball coach?
Yeah.
Well, if he was a football coach, I wish we had every priest in the world would grab a face mask and just grab it and reorient me. Like, Kevin, you're not getting it right. Like, you're too slothful. You have too many measures of pride. Kevin, I know you think you're getting it done. You're a Catholic guy. You're not. I'm here as your father to tell you you're not. That's like a face mask grab. I need to be reoriented to the reality of the defects and flaws and sins of my soul. If the Catholic Church, if shepherds, bishops, priests grab face masks, acted a little more. I'm not going to stand for like Bobby Knight, physically accosting a player, but he spoke with candor to his players because he wanted to drive them to excellence. Now, I don't want to signal out Bobby Knight, but all great coaches would look for something in a player, and I'm an old sports writer, that's why I bring it up, in a player that he knew he could get more out of.
Yes.
So he spoke with candor. Why wouldn't a priest do this? So that's I'm with you, Mike. Yeah. It just makes sense. And by the way, that is the burden of his identity. Mm-hmm. Get into things that he sees in the confessional spiritual direction to lead, to build the kingdom of God. You know,
Right.
that's what we want from our spiritual fathers.
Right. I just want to say, I just even recently had a friend, have a friend who is going through a divorce. Like, her and her husband are in, this priest parish, and they both went to him, and her husband, whatever, said what he was saying, and she said what he was saying. And the priest, their pastor, basically said to them, "This is too complicated. Good luck. Let me know, how I'm just going to pray for you." And there's a part of me that's like, okay, yeah, maybe it's complicated, but there's another part of me that's like, what the heck? Like, who is going to help these people? Who is going to help them if their pastor won't? And it's very refreshing to hear you say that they are the custodians for the souls in their parish, because that's the way I saw it. I heard that, and whatever, we're continuing to walk with her, and she's figuring things out. But just to hear that, it's kind of like, wait a second, who's spiritually responsible for these people?
Right. Who's fighting for that marriage?
If it's not the pastor. Yes, exactly. If he is not fighting. So is someday you're going to be able to say to the children, when the children leave the church and they, they're like, "Father, why didn't you say anything?" That's what I was thinking, and I know that takes courage, but it's like, what can we do other than pray? But challenge them, encourage them. I don't know if you have any thoughts. I'm sure you do.
I have 5 podcasts worth of thoughts, but I am going to just say this. Let's make an analogous. No, let's draw a linear symmetry to what that father said, to what that priest said to that couple. So he kind of threw up his arms, and said it's too complicated. So let's just say that couple said, okay, well, father said we can get divorced. Well, let's say they had children. Okay, so here's the linear symmetry. So a priest that would say that to a couple, saying it's too complicated, probably divorce is right. You can't. It's a chocolate mess. So go ahead and split. Well, that priest doesn't think about that couple's children in the same exact way that priest doesn't look at his 1,000 parishioners as souls under his care, his spiritual children. So it's very analogous.
Yeah.
So if a priest isn't a father of the souls in the parish, he's not going to see that married couple and say, well, he's a father and she's a mother to these children. So he's going to say, you know what? The kids will make it somehow. Go ahead and get divorced.
Exactly.
Right.
I could break this down in 20, and I really could, in 20 different ways. I'll just say one. COVID 2020. This is just one. I'll be very brief. A priest that would say, we need to protect the body. There must be 6 feet of difference. You must double mask. You must do that. Well, that same priest that is not attentive to the soul, but attentive to the body, that priest very often will be, I'm just going to say it, I'm sorry, but I'm going to say it. He'll be overweight. He'll have a chef. He'll probably have a couple of drinks, a couple of nights a week. He'll go to good restaurants. He'll go on vacation. He won't wear his collar. So they're more attentive to the body because that's how they live than the soul, where the ascetic, right. the priest with the ascetical spirit during COVID, he doesn't care about his body. If I get COVID and die, you know what, that stinks, but maybe it's my time. I know there's souls in my parish that need to be in front of the monstrance right now. They need to receive the Eucharist because it's medicine during COVID. So they found ways to allow people to receive the sacraments because he didn't care about his body, because he was fasting. So, and again, I could draw this down the line in so many ways. Yeah. But I'll shut it down with that.
No, there's a lot more that we could probably unpack with that. But we need shepherds. We need priests who are stepping in, who see us for who we are, the souls that are under their care. Not just
the body, not just what's right in front of us. Yeah.
And it's a simple pivot, but it's true. It's like, who are we to you? We're under your care, and we want to be fed. And yes, I have a certain level of autonomy because together, we're the priests of the home. We do have a level of autonomy and what happens here, within prudential judgment. But we need shepherds. We need pastors. We need to be under spiritual direction. And it's something I think more than ever we're hungry for. Okay, as we close out,
I know, I'm like looking at time.
I mean,
we could probably talk for a long time. But
yeah. Do you want to just maybe kind of just, how did the story end, right? You know, we've made a turning point. How is it? Was it?
How are you doing now?
How are you doing now? How's the family now? How's life now? Is there's still always room to grow, right? I mean, she has to live with you, so I mean, there's that challenge, right? But how are things now?
We're on our honeymoon. So Alicia read last night that I would call it. Krista would call it, if she was on this podcast, it's something. Supernatural happened one night at 3 a.m. when she was at a holy hour, where essentially Our Lady, Mary, who Krista has a devotion to, kind of led her in her mind, but in meditative prayer, almost like Mary was beckoning her, come with me, come with me. And Krista was awake, she was praying, and with her eyes closed, she was kind of led and followed Mary, and Mary stopped, and Krista's like, what's going on? And Mary beckoned her to kneel, and in her what she saw in her prayer was, in front of her was Jesus sitting on a throne, and Mary smiled and said, it's time to let it go. And Krista cried. Beautiful. And she was crying in real life. She was crying while she was sitting next to her friend Mary, and she was saying, no, I can't. And Mary said, no, it's time. No, I can't. No, I know you can't, but he can make it happen. So give it to him. And so she did. And then Krista came home the next morning, and she said, Kevin, it's gone. And it has been gone since 2020. So again.
Wow. Thanks be to God.
Yeah.
Wow. And this is a story that needs to be told. I'm so glad you wrote it, and I'm so glad you made it so engaging. Again, for Alicia to read it in one day, now I actually have to read it. So
I told him, I was like, you'll love it. You should read this.
Well, and also too, your Irishness, she said, just came out. So I love that, and I can't wait. But any final thoughts as we look out, because you've got a beautiful story that you've shared here. A lot of challenges. It's a little messy, kind of on brand for us in that way. But for whether it be couples who are struggling or whether it be priests who are listening, any final thoughts for us in our modern world today?
Well, two practical thoughts for the folks who are listening who might be in travail, who might be suffering from similar things. One, I'm begging you to reach out and find a priest who you've been told will tend to you, who will sort of, again, take that spiral staircase into the mess and work and fight with you. So seek out, don't give up, seek that spiritual father. That's number one. The other practical thought is this. I know it's lonely. I know there's no consolations. Mm-hmm. I know there's not really any good days. But remember, what's the greatest act of love in the history of the world? It is the violence of Jesus Christ on the cross, who had no consolations. So when you take on the withering loneliness of the afflicted spouse, and you sort of square your shoulders and say, you know what? I'm going to do my best to love her or him from the outside. And I'm just going to do my best, and I'm going to do it by intensifying my prayer life and going to God. And I will encourage, the thing that helped me was learning for the first time in my life what contemplative prayer demands, what meditative prayer demands. And it's a lot of silence and just resting your head against God and saying, God, I'm a little 5-year-old boy with no answers. So I'm just going to be quiet. And maybe you might come into this inner cell and give me an answer or two. And that's what really helped me.
That's
awesome.
Powerful. That's
my
powerful.
Gosh. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Kevin, and for writing the book and really sharing your story. And please thank Krista for us for being so vulnerable and allowing people to hear her story.
Where can people get the book and or stay connected with you, Kevin?
Well, I would go into kevinwells.org. The Hermit's published by Ignatius, and I have a brand new release out now called Coached by the Cure, about what John Vianney would tell parents today. So they can find all that on kevinwells.org.
And I can't wait to read that book as well. That sounds awesome. Geared specifically towards parents and their spiritual leadership in the home. So, Kevin, again, thank you. God bless you for your work. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, guys. It's been great.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kevin and really...
he's so passionate.
He is. And just blunt, and really that priest, that hermit, was really blunt. And that's the freshness that he brings to it. So really check out the book and really invest in the story, because there's something really powerful there for all of us. All
right. So we're going to give you 6 key takeaways, and they're... I think that there's probably more in there than just these. But so here's the first 3. When a person experiences shame, they always need an outlet for that shame. Sometimes it's themselves and people turn inward. And sometimes, though, it's somebody else.
Right.
Second, Satan is a total jerk, right? He uses those wounds from our childhood when some of us are innocent victims, but he uses those wounds to beat us up and tell us the lie that we're not worthy of love. Every addiction is hiding a wound. So to be truly free from addiction, that wound is what really needs to be healed. So, and then when you're in the desert of a troubled marriage, the only way to get out or to get through that is complete reliance on God. Kevin's story made that so clear. Yeah. God calls us deeper into the desert to rest, to abide, and really to surrender. And that's what we need when we're in those deserts, right? Fifthly here, our vows for life, and that's an impossible task. I mean, as married couples, that's really a crazy and tall order. It can only be accomplished by the grace of God. We've said this over and over, and Kevin really reinforced that. And finally, priests are custodians of the souls under, in their parish, kind of under their care. And when one of those souls is in error, they need the Holy Spirit to speak with firmness and candor, right? They need a boldness about them. Anything less is false charity and false mercy. That was really, really great. Okay, so 2 couple discussion questions. So there's a lot to discuss in this. Ask yourself, are there areas of our life or our marriage that aren't completely surrendered to God, right? How can we as a couple surrender everything to him? And then also, are there priests in our lives who are true shepherds? How can you love and support that priest better? So get the book from Ignatius here, the Hermit. Get it for yourself. Maybe get it for your priest. Maybe get it for others that you might know. And if you want the show notes and or those couple discussion questions, or want to join us for the webinar, our Support Our May Appeal, visit us at messyfamilyproject.org. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Family, we're taking a chance.